by the time I was 21, I had lost my really close friend in New York. He had overdosed on heroin. My very first boyfriend, the love of my life, had overdosed on heroin. And ironically enough, his best friend, who was the one that found him, overdosed on heroin. So heroin was never the thing for me. But I started working at this strip joint as a waitress called Gimlet's. And I befriended this girl who was 18. Her boyfriend was 41, banker. And she invited me back to her place for a drink because they were living together. And sure enough, we started doing coke. And it wasn't a big deal, right? It wasn't something that I thought about buying. It was just kind of there. But little by little, it turned into, after work on a Wednesday, we would inevitably hang out and do drugs, right? So every Wednesday, it was just the thing. And then it became Wednesday and Saturdays. And then by the time I was 21, I had lost friends to overdoses, people that I knew were in rehab. I had a roommate that overdosed so many times that I took him to A&E at this hospital that was quite close to where we lived, and they knew me by name. And they offered me a place in a rehab facility because they just assumed that because he and I were roommates that we were both doing heroin at the same time. So I managed to get myself out of that situation.
My name is Fikra, and I like to talk about my own life story with drug use. Childhood trauma was something that had led me towards drug use because my feelings at the time were so painful and emotional. I didn't unfortunately have a very good upbringing with my parents, but the only way I could possibly escape from the family home in a sense was literally escaping from the home itself. And then basically I proceeded to move from Ireland over to England. I'd actually found myself caught up in whirlwinds and social circles of people that I would known during the course of my time in London. I didn't have necessarily a stable place to stay. I spent most of my time moving from squats to sofa surfing to sleeping out on the streets. From there, basically, I did develop a heroin addiction which went on for many years. Well, when I say many years, it was in my case about 5 years. But there was just a part of me, I think, in the sense that I carried so much pain from childhood that it was difficult to let go. I'm able to reflect on such experiences now in the present because thankfully I'd achieved abstinence from heroin itself. And through that own personal journey, my heroin use, in a sense beforehand, enabled me to actually meet up with different people around different areas, not necessarily being in the same area. But a friend of mine, known as Karen, was kind of my main scoring buddy. And basically, any time we got together, we would try and score as much as we possibly can. But for one particular period, and it was the turning point for me was in the year of 2001, that I hadn't seen Karen for quite some time, and I was involved in a relationship, you could say, with another man, where I didn't feel, in the sense, I particularly knew where I stood in the relationship, and this caused a lot of emotional difficulties for me. But I suppose my epiphany was that I realised, in a sense, that my excuse for using is that I just found emotional issues to be my main trigger. Some people tend to say that money is their main trigger. It can be, but that's not always necessarily the case. Relationships, in a sense, can be a trigger for drug use. Anything, in a sense, that affects our ordinary reality in our life in some way or another can actually have an effect.
I think it's abject loneliness and not really knowing what to do with myself, and also being at home by yourself for many, many years. There's always been a joke about 50s housewives, Martini and Valium. Well, It's not really a joke, it's quite true. So instead of socializing with my friends, I would just do cocaine by myself.
I was worried about stopping smoking because I thought it would sort of eliminate me from my social group, because I was like hanging out with a lot of smokers, and for some reason I felt that like smokers were actually really like fun people to be around and everything, and I thought that people that wasn't smoking were like boring. But obviously since giving up since 2008, I've actually found that not to be true. In fact, I can't stand the smell of smoke or anything associated with it anymore, so I'm so glad I actually gave up.
People can be quick to judge if you're using drugs, like heroin, or if you're shooting up using a needle. But part of that process is not just necessarily the addiction to the main substance like heroin, but the rituals that are taking place, in a sense where basically you decide to cook up heroin and inject yourself with it. This is what we call in the drug using world as needle fixation. So I suppose in some way or another, yes, injecting drugs can lead to some form of self-harm, but the whole ritual of injecting yourself, in a sense, was a different feeling entirely.
For me, the addiction for me was always very much about holding on to the past and things that, it was like an emotional thing I was holding on to. So because I wasn't able to deal with it or process all of it, and I knew it was there, I used something to try to suppress it. And there were many times on my journey that even though I was talking about my stuff in therapies and stuff, that I still, just to talk about it, I needed the marijuana, which is what I used. And so I held on to it really tight, and I got to a place so many times on my path where I was like, I just don't want this anymore, I don't like the taste of it, I don't like the smell of it. And what I feel now in hindsight, what I was really saying is I'm ready to look, I'm feeling more ready to look at it now. But maybe, again, it's part of my process to still hold on a little. So I think that I got to a point with my own self several times with marijuana, because I've been off and on, but I think I've finally got to a point right now, and it might have something to do with age or just development, is that I'm like, I actually don't really need this to fulfill.
The deciding factor is when my son started, he never really realized what it definitely something. And little by little, I've weaned myself off, but it's still a struggle. It's not like I don't do it anymore. I'd be a hypocrite to say that I don't. And you think about it every day. But what I realized is that I started substituting drugs for all the other things in my life.
But on one occasion when I did meet up with Karen, she had actually spent some time in detox. And in fact, unfortunately, that particular evening I met up with her, she was kicked out by the afternoon. But she was adamant that she didn't want to be using heroin. She was under the investigation of social services at the time because she had 2 young daughters. And I completely understood, in the sense that I didn't want to be in jeopardy of jeopardising her own recovery. I suppose part of me just decided in a way that it was just time to move on with my life. But I found it initially very, very hard to deal with that when I had problems with my boyfriend back in London. So from there, she said for me to stay for the night, which I did, and basically would try and score for me, but she was adamant she didn't want to use. by the morning time I woke up and I remember it quite clearly. It was a nice, clear, sunny day, and I knew it was going to be hot because you could just feel the weather, the temperature just increasing as the morning was going by. But I just had a thought in my head that I just said to myself, you know what, if she can do it, so can I. And from there I decided to leave without saying goodbye to Karen or the kids and make my way back to London. That was the last time I'd ever seen Karen or her kids. And I suppose in some way or another that if she was serious about her own path, shall we say, to abstinence, then I didn't want to be in a position to jeopardise that for her. But it allowed me to start thinking for myself about what I wanted, and I decided that was the last time I would use the needle.
Oh gosh, when it comes to addiction, it's really difficult, circumstances to discuss with. My first, attempt of doing it after my mom passed away, which is really hard. The reason why I did that because I had difficulties in my life and I can't take it. So the only thing of doing it is actually using something, some substance, which to make me feel stronger. Yes, I may be a resilient person right now, but then without, experiencing things, I won't, I won't be myself right now. The second time that it did happen, after my marriage broke down, that I have to be dependent into something because I thought recreational drugs is important, but then realizing that no one will love you if you are that person who jumps around, played around, especially when you're in substance.
I went from having a really large group of friends that were really supportive about anything and everything that I could go to never really knowing how understanding people would be. So even when I got to a point that I wanted to help, I couldn't reach out, not to my husband, because he never understood. I'll never forget hearing him saying to somebody, oh yeah, I could tell, I always know what, junkies look like. And after they had left, I said, you don't, because your wife is one, and you're in denial over that. And from his point of view, it's like he saw me having this downward spiral, but didn't quite know how to address it. And the fact is, no one can, people can address it as much as they want, but until you have that epiphany, people can tell you, you can go in and out of rehab, but you've got to find the substitute for that. For me now, it's studying. I want to go back and retrain as a counselor. I've got a master's degree in psychology that I've never used, and my aim is now to become a drug counselor for kids on the street, because really the vehicle is pain, and you forget about the pain, you forget about all those things that are making you feel horrible and insignificant, or whatever your pain is, and you've got to address what that is. People judge when they see people living on the street or junkies on the street. My attitude now is, here, by the grace of God go I, because you could so easily end up there. And if you actually interview people that are on the street and ask them how they got there, some of them are runaways, but some of them, there was a man that used to beg for money outside of the grocery store that I go to, and I just started talking to him one day because he's extremely articulate. And his story is that he was on the stock market. He was a city boy. And it got to the point that the wife and the kids just kept on wanting more and more. And every time he went in, he just got sick of how money really perverts everything, and how, going out with the guys, so that would mean, they would a half a kilo of cocaine for the weekend, hookers and blow, right? And he woke up one morning, having to go out and buy his wife, expensive perfumes, flowers, and some shoes, and he thought this is how it placates her. She could see what was happening to him, but the choice is, you have to stop this, but you can't quit your job, right? And he finally left, and he said that he's the happiest he's ever been, and he lives on the street, right?
I was getting like a lot of like smokers' coughs and, getting a lot of like general coughs and for health reasons basically. I went to the NHS support clinic to do it on about 3 occasions and unfortunately failed. And then my mum and dad become quite sick. So my father died of cancer and COPD in 2006, and I had to watch him unfortunately go through a horrible, painful death where he couldn't hardly breathe, and we thought it was just COPD, and then once in hospital they realised it was cancer, and 11 months later unfortunately my lovely mother died of cancer as well, of the lungs. And I thought to myself, I've really got to give this up now, and I was still coughing and stuff, and I went to see a consultant, and he gave me a chest x-ray, and in the interim I'd sort of gone to A&E because I couldn't breathe properly, and they misdiagnosed me with COPD, which obviously put the fear of God into me, and that just made me stop. I just thought, it's like it was like a miracle really. It just made me stop smoking, and I'm glad I have stopped because my life's a lot better health-wise, financially. I feel a lot fitter. And smoking to me obviously was like a friend that I would always kind of like go for my 5-minute break or whatever, and it was like a form of comfort. But now I find it a form of disgust when I'm near smoking, so I'm really glad I've done it.
So I think a lot of it for me was my persona of being quite strong, which I am. I'm formidable, but at the same time never being able to talk about my weaknesses or my insecurities, because I've always been the go-to person. And that pain of always being the go-to person and never really being able to say how I felt, that stoicism. And what I've done really is I've just completely changed everything around, and I don't really associate with anybody that does drugs. And little by little I'm trying to fill that void with other things because I just don't want to give up. And people do. I have a friend who was a CEO of an advertising company, happy guy, making money hand over fist. One day he just snapped, and he's been doing what's it called, that horrible drug that you can make with basically cleaning products.
GHB, crystal meth.
And he's a meth head, right? So he had AIDS. The company that he was loyally working for years basically fired him when they found out. He took them to court. He's just retiring now, so he has been getting $125,000 a year, right? Having not done anything. Married a very wealthy man. They broke up as a result of his meth habit, right? And so he gets $7,000 a month from his husband and still gets a regular salary, but doesn't do anything except sleep until 4 in the afternoon, wake up, do meth, have lots of rent boys come over, have a massive fuckathon, and he is happy with his life. And I've just cut him loose because, we talked about it, and I'm one of the few people that he still communicates with, and I don't give him a hard time. And he basically said to me, I am happy. And the funny thing is, he always used to say jokingly, in his dotage, he was going to become a mad drug addict, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. How happy he is, I don't know, but that's what he wants to do. And I just thought, the last conversation I had with him, I thought, right, that's it.
I don't really need this to get me through anymore. I've been getting through without it. And to be honest with you as well, there's been times I thought, well, I could actually just keep doing what I'm doing and get through, but I can't, because there's something about it being so captivating and so seductive that that started to take over. And when I really wanted to be me and be grounded in my own reality and where I wanted to be, I realised then I've got to let it go.
So the last time I used heroin itself was by April 2001. But that has spilled into other addictions, like chemicals, multiple substances, ketamine, ecstasy, microdots, LSD, cocaine, crack cocaine, alcohol, cigarettes, cannabis. The list goes on. We're living in a society where the drugs are changing rapidly. There's crystal meth, metadone, all the other drugs that seem to be coming out. As from what I've witnessed in my own life, I've seen many different drugs around me as the decades have gone by.
I toyed around a little bit with heroin in my 20s, and whilst I didn't get addicted, I started to, because I didn't really like it, and I had an allergic reaction to it. Although I didn't know it was an allergic reaction, I did feel itchy, like under my skin, but I could feel something taking over where it makes you feel so bad that you have to keep taking it to feel normal or better, so you're in a vicious sort of cycle. Well, luckily I didn't really like it enough to really let it catch up with me. But I had a second bout or second dealing with heroin about 30 years later when I had a hip replacement a couple of years ago. And they gave me some morphine without sort of telling me, a little orange pill. And, I was kind of groggy from all the anesthetic and, getting through the process. And it was painful, very intense. They're screwing your leg off and then back on, basically, And so the pain relief was welcome, but I felt myself almost go to the same place again with when I was younger, 20, experimenting with snorting it.
So, I think for me, one of the driving forces is even getting into it is the fact that I come from a drug culture. I came from a generation of drug culture. All our heroes were heroin addicts, cocaine addicts, people overdosing, Jack Kerouac, and it became this thing, and it was a modicum of cool. You were cool. So now I'm dealing with the fact that everything I didn't want to be, which is a housewife, taking care of a kid, I have become. And I think that that's what really got me depressed. But then you suddenly realize that it's a fear and being lazy to change, because we are all creatures of habit. So it's hard. It's easier to maintain your routine than it is to step out of your routine and actually do something else. And it took everything in me, after being depressed for a while, to realize that I don't have to wake up one morning and go, that's it, I'm not doing it anymore. It's just small steps. Because for a while I couldn't get out of bed. Because your body is going up and down, up and down, up and down. So all of a sudden those endorphins just don't naturally happen anymore. So it started for me, but just by, just before school ended, and my son and my husband would come home, I'd get dressed and walk the dogs and tidy up, and everything was fine, and I'd have dinner ready and just, being a Laura Petrie happy housewife. So then it was just like, okay, so then I'd wake up at 1 o'clock. Right? Wake up. And little by little, and in small steps. And I think that people are under the impression that you can just go to rehab and it's all over with. All rehab does is clean you up for 30 days and then throw you back into the general population, because that's what you have to do. And, stepping away from the people that actually are triggers for you is one thing, but any kind of drug is all around you all the time. And it's about how you cope with it. And I find now, well, now it's easy because we're in lockdown, but going to a party and someone says, I have lines, and I would think, oh yeah. And now what I do is I go, you know what? Save me one, right? And you just try and, and eventually sometimes I would break down and do a line. But the thing is, it took me a while. I didn't, just because I just knew. It's like that old saying, 1 is too much and 1 is too much and 10 is not enough. It's like, yeah. And that really is the case.
But I found, in the sense that basically part of the journey of actually working towards a happy, fulfilling life was for me to focus on divination or astrology and spirituality. And actually found that when I did remain abstinent from alcohol and drugs, I was kind of more determined to do a lot more reading into the occult, and also to basically explore spiritual subjects on an esoterical level.
And plus for me also, my spiritual life is really important to me, because all I've got that no one can define. That's when I said that the addiction was taking up too much of my spiritual life and I needed to leave it. I had a choice. That's what it was. I had a choice. I'm a dreamer. When I say I'm a dreamer, I don't mean like I just go through life. I dream prophetically, and I dream just everyday mundane things that just help me get through. And for me, my addiction was taking me away from that. And it's not just my substance abuse, because if I get too overly involved with codependence as well, my dream life and my spiritual life can take a bit of a back seat, and I wasn't prepared for that. So I just think you have to I had to think about, what am I prepared for? Am I prepared to continue doing this for the rest of my life and have to work this out after my physical self has gone? Or do I work with it here, where I am in the physical, and look at the challenges it's brought me and let it go now? And I did that.
I would describe myself as being a very deep thinker. A deep thinker in wonderful ways and a deep thinker in the wrong way. But I suppose in some way or another I'd always kind of asked myself this question, why are we here? I've always had a strong interest in reincarnation, and in some way or another, basically, there have been many lifetimes I have actually become a shaman. In some way or another, basically mixing with psychedelic substances or any plants for medicinal properties for your tribe. But I suppose in some way or another, basically addictions can come easily to us.
Well, I can only speak for myself, but I think when being an addict and being quite an addictive person, when you want something, you go out and you do anything to go and get it.
Yeah.
So I think, like, when you kind of, even when you get into those heightened sort of using substances, be it alcohol, be it narcotics, so I feel like I'm kind of more closer to the source, and it makes me feel like I'm closer to a higher source, where I've sort of once was. The world makes a kind of a sense. When I'm not under those influences, I don't feel like the world I belong. So, but when I've sort of understood that, then I realised that you don't need the actual substances to go inwardly, i.e. being in meditation. You can still go and use that addictive energy to go and really find, because you want it so badly. And you realise that there's other ways in which... Well, I'm glad that I've learned 9 years of figuring it out, being a sort of an ex-smoker, and still knowing that even with... is you can still work on it on an inwardly addictive, and that is... For me, I'm still an addict because I want it more and more, is to get closer to that higher source where I once was. And now that I don't need to use substances for it, I can go do meditation, but I know that I'm shutting myself off from the world because I'm trying to still go and get that nourishment from in long periods of doing meditation.
Ironically, my father in a sense never drank, but he smoked. My mum in a sense knew when to stop drinking, but she very rarely smoked, and if she smoked, she would only smoke if she was upset, which could be 1 or 2 cigarettes, and that was it. You wouldn't see her with a fag in her hand for months or years. So a lot of people tend to basically ask themselves this question: is this really truly genetics? In my case, because of reincarnation, and I suppose in a way mixing and experimenting with other substances with medicinal properties, the pattern of drug use in a sense can be at your fall in your own current life. The many people who have played Russian roulette with heroin who've unfortunately sadly passed away. I had quite a number of using buddies I knew, and all it takes is an overdose to occur, because when you buy something like heroin or you score it, you just don't know how pure the substance could be. But I suppose in some way another part of me actually asked why am I the lucky one, in a sense, decided to go through this journey, through this tunnel of darkness, and be here now to tell the story.
So I think it's a combination for me of age, because you get to the point that it's like your health is tantamount. But also I think for me it's if I could go back, and I kind of did it but I fell prey to it, is that you don't have to follow the crowd. And if you're in pain, the beauty is now, certainly more so than when I was growing up, is that there's therapy. There are people that you can talk to out there, and it's not frowned upon anymore. Now it's frowned upon if you don't have a therapist. It really is. So, yeah, I think that's what it is. But I think the key to staying straight is finding out your Achilles heel and trying to work on that, and letting go of a lot of stuff that you hold on to, because at the end of the day, it's just shit, really. You know, it's just stuff. It's just stuff. It's happened. It's gone. Life goes on. It's like, but it's just getting to that point, which is not an easy point to get to.
We used to have a corner shop, and, you know, she's a Sikh woman, and basically she's not touched any alcohol or cigarettes, or no addictions that I'm aware of, but she's a Buddhist. She does meditation, and she's kind of had guidance through a teacher with some of the Sikh principles. It's kind of an offshoot of Sikhism. And basically when she used to go to the temple, and she cooks every Sunday as part of her Sikh practice, but you know, she sees the people that come to the temples that sometimes don't go there when it's raining. But when she used to open this shop, and be it raining, hailstoning, thunder, she would see her regular customers come in to buy the drink or the tobacco, and she'd be like, oh my god, they never would think twice about the weather. She goes, and she used to admire them, she used to call them the true believers. She goes, if they turned their addiction inwardly. I remember he used to saying this when I was 17, 18, and like, oh my god, you're like mad, you're actually like looking up to these people, like they're just drunk or whatever. But she kind of was in awe about, like, wow, they really want it. And she just said if they can only turn that addiction inwardly, they'll be free from all bondage. They'll be enlightened people, because they've got that huge desire of doing whatever they need to do to get them coppers together to pay for that. And they're scrimpers, like, they won't give in till they've got it. And she goes, that's the kind of attitude you need to be a true believer.
It can be a very lonely experience, I can tell you that. Because if you're absolutely adamant about coming off drugs, or alcohol for that matter, it's important you have to put things in place. So in some cases, it's best to change your number, so your dealer doesn't have your number. If you're finding in the sense that money is becoming a trigger, maybe reach a trusted friend and see whether he or she could save the money for you. Sometimes if it means walking to work or going wherever you need to go, take a different route. As you make these changes, you'll begin to notice in the sense that you are cutting people out of your life. And I suppose in the sense that when attachments come into play, attachments can be either wonderful things or dreadful things. And with attachments, in the sense, it can basically lead us to cause a lapse or relapse. Some people tend to find that by the time they've had enough and need to stay away from drugs, it normally means staying away from a particular area. And having progressed from heroin on to chemical substances, I spent most of my time going to clubs and dancing. And in the end, I eventually had to stay away from areas like Vauxhall or Brixton, for that matter, because it was triggering my drug use for chemical dependency. And basically from there, when I decided, when I was housed by the council in Wandsworth, I decided there and then to make some positive changes to my life, which meant focusing on meditation and gaining knowledge on esoterical subjects, as well as studying astrology, which I did full time with the Faculty of Astrological Studies.
In astrology, any planetary oppositions in a natal chart across a Scorpio-Taurus or 2nd 8th house polarity are signs of possible addictive tendencies, especially involving Neptune, Pluto, Venus, Sun and Mars. Neptune is also a good indicator of where drug or alcohol patterns lie, depending on the sign and house placement.
If I rather you find your healing through a natural process than doing drugs, healing because it won't help. I'm glad that I did. One person have woke me up and slapped my face and told me that if you're sleeping everywhere, because when you're on the substance, it will put you through into something that you don't usually do. So I rather, think things thorough before doing things.
Realizing the triggers and underlying dynamics. What were you thinking just before you wanted a hit? Trace that thought back.
And I don't believe in screaming it from the rooftops, but I do believe that if somebody is sitting down and talking to me about it, I wouldn't hide the fact that I had an issue. I have a friend who had a heroin problem, and we all worked together for a while. And when people started talking about it, she never actually ever stood up and said. And it's that sort of social stigma. And the thing is that if more people actually, I feel, came right out and said, right, I've had an issue with this. You'd be surprised how receptive people are. And as well, you'd be surprised if you actually open up and talk about things, how many other people will come out and say, I can't cope.
Exactly, because I think even if you go back to like sugar or whatever, that's the first drug, so everyone's got this in common.
Oh yeah.
Society,
I mean, for me, with Luke, it was, it started off with coffee mornings, and with mainstream mothers with mainstream kids and mothers with kids with issues. And the biggest thing is that all it took was one person to sort of go, I feel like I don't want to do this anymore. I hate being a parent. And then people would automatically, and everybody's got an issue, but I think that the stoicism of that, so you've got that insecurity or whatever that darkness is that you hold in your heart, and then the stigma of you don't want the shame, you don't want people realizing. And I think that, there'll be some people that walk away from you, but for the most part I find that everybody's got their thing. Whether it's alcohol, whether it's food, whether it's shopping, whether it's I don't know, how many other things?
I find like
exercise.
I find like food, the ones to do with the body, like sex and food, can be often the hardest ones because the drugs, when you stop doing them, you can actually put them in the past, but the food and the sex you carry on with. So they can become really problematic because you've still got to engage with the same function.
And so I happen to, I've done this for lots of people, so I did it on myself. I've worked with and lived with people who've had a heroin addiction, and I basically chose a more organic sidestep to it, so which was marijuana brownies, where you just cook it clean and put it in as the oil in your Great British Bake Off sort of recipe, and it sort of almost feels like that kind of calming for some, get high on heroin feeling. It kind of gives you something akin to it, which is a little bit more psychedelic. It's not just a bunch of candy that sort of damp you down a bit. You're actually, and very little goes a long way. So you're actually not flooding. You're actually not putting that much into your system. So a brownie could last for 5 or 6 hours. It's a slow buzz, and the psychedelic quality, from my first-hand experience, is such that it's a momentum, a sort of low, slow burning momentum builds, a sort of psychedelic momentum, and you ease out of it, right? And so, it's something you can't do very often, and you will sleep hard. It just kind of gives you a rest and a respite and a slightly different perspective on what you've been pursuing. It doesn't work for everybody, but I've had a few friends who, were able to take a step back. And, of course, there's the danger of getting emotionally addicted to that. It's just that the stakes are not as high for your health. I understand it's quite good for you. There are lots of theories about that. So I really believe in, there are drugs that are called drugs, herbs, that are here to enable evolution, right? I'm not the first who said it. I think Terence McKenna said it, and Bill Hicks maybe referred to it.
And this time I didn't need the 12 steps, although I do think the 12 steps was very, very helpful for me years ago when I first went into it. It did help, because I'm somebody who likes to talk about how I feel, so it really helped me. But I still went back on it. But I got to a point now where I'm right. I know what I need. And it's just it's so simple. Let go, and that's it. And I've not felt challenged since. There you go.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. No, that's perfect. I think someone hearing that is great. Is that not anything else? Was anything frightening you about giving up? You were thinking that you're going to change. Something's going to change about you because you gave up and you weren't going to be the same person or something like that.
I think there's always some kind of fear before you actually do give up. Because there was something, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but there was something about me feeling like, oh my God, But there was more in front of me that made me feel like, what am I? I'll be leaving behind all that part of me that feels like I can't, lack. So I was more invested in what is there in front of me rather than staying here and what is my past and what I'm holding on to. So I wanted to let go because I didn't want to hold on anymore, and that's it.
I've never believed in NA meetings. And it's not like I don't want to share. I don't know how effective they are, because I think that, and this is just me, it works for some people, but I think that going someplace once a week, hi, I'm Paulina.
Repeating.
Hi, Paulina. And that's fine, but that's not really the way life works.
Yeah.
And these people are not people that are within your support group. And that's what counts. But there's so many layers to things like that as well. Like there's the social economic things where, a kid living out on the street or somebody that's really poor, and they start dealing and then they start doing, and that becomes habitual, and they don't have the kind of support that somebody who, like a middle class person, would have, right? So there's that aspect of it, and it makes it harder. And I think the most important thing is that people shouldn't judge, because there's still a stigma that addiction is, sorry, she likes to chase flies. Addiction is something that people don't realize, that it's not just drugs and alcohol. It's exercise, it's sugar, it's sex, it's food, it's alcohol is the worst by far, because it's readily available and because it's socially acceptable. I mean, it's incredible that our neighbor next door said, "I like a drink." Now, I think that it's a generational thing as well. I like a drink meant, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, but no one says that because it's legal. So you don't have an addiction. It's there. Everybody does it, right? I think that that's probably one of the hardest things to kick.
When you feel anger towards a substance, see and treat it as a controlling enemy, an adversary that you're going to beat. Then you can move to stop the addiction. If you feel a victim to it, it's way harder. Timing is important. You will feel when the time is right to quit and do it. Do you really want to turn a page and admit that nothing will get you that kind of high again, and be able to live without that high?
I found it very easy to give up smoking once I was diagnosed with COPD, and obviously the death of my parents spurred me on to give it up, because it really frightened me to watch somebody smoking and having like smoking related diseases and dying from it is really horrific. And unless you've actually experienced it with somebody or been onto a ward where people can't literally breathe. My father said to me, I said, "What's it like, Dad, having COPD?" And he said, "It's like Frankenstein waiting around that door, or Dracula trying to get you." He said, "I can't even take 2 steps." He said, "I feel like just taking a glass of cyanide." He goes, "It's just so horrendous." And then unfortunately about a week later, you know, he passed away. And then as I say, 11 months later, my mother passed away. So yeah, that stopped me from smoking.
And also, I think that people are quite dishonest with themselves and others around them, because for years I have had a friend who has been a fall down drunk, and I'm not, this is not exaggerating, this is literally, and no one says anything because people don't want to get too involved, or they don't want to insult the person. Now, and when you do, the person's insulted, but I think it's important that people may not necessarily agree with you or go, "Oh yes, you're right, I am," but it gives you food for thought. And for me, I was quite fortunate that my husband sort of said, "I don't like you when you're stoned. You go off into another world, you go off into tangents. You're not you." But I think that that has a lot to do with it. And I think that the more you substitute drugs with, you know, saving your soul, you become more and more, for me, I got more and more lost in the abyss of who I was. And I think the hardest thing is to get back to that point. But it's also to just not beat yourself up about it and move on. And never forget that you are still addicted. Even when you're not doing it, you are still addicted. And I know for me, there are certain times that if emotionally I'm feeling upset about something, that is my go-to. It's still my go-to. You know, and sometimes I can be very sensible, and then sometimes it's just like, fuck it.
You just have to make it more of an adventure to pursue your full graduation from hominid to psychedelic human. Well, I think that Terence McKenna, as a, what did he call an ethnobotanist, first of all asserted that people were here to move seeds around, that, which I love, that we're actually lower on the sort of food chain. Yeah. But you know, also this idea of certain drugs were here to enable drugs, herbs, I think it has to be organic and earth-based, whether it's mushrooms, and marijuana it's a mild psychedelic, isn't it? So as part of the psychedelic experience, he's saying that our journey from hominid, there are various theories about climate change and certain bright mushrooms making themselves available as the water draws back, but that the journey from hominid to human is essentially psychedelic. And we react quite well to cannabinoids, for getting, whether it's getting high or getting a little bit of, I'm not really sure if you could call it's anything like an alkaline boost, but there are some medicinal qualities. So he describes some of the traits of the psychedelic infusion is in low doses. It not perfects, but sharpens edge detection, right? So, and it also heightens your libido. So that combination of factors could express itself as saving yourself from your enemy because your vision is sharper, and successful procreation, right? And so that's how we humans came for. It's an idea, and sometimes I think about that and give myself permission and forgive myself to indulge in certain things.
I think if you're dealing with somebody who's got an addiction, I think it's really important to strengthen your boundaries so you know what you will accept and what you won't accept. I think it's really good to have a tough love approach. Strengthen your tough love. Because you're gonna need it in the relationship, especially with someone who's got a really strong addiction. I think it's really important to understand where that person is in the process of addiction. If they're going down a slope backwards and they're struggling to get out of it, but they have no capacity to do that at the moment, they're going to put their hands out to anybody. And if you put your hand out, and they're not ready to actually properly help themselves as well, there's a strong possibility you could get pulled into that situation and you could get pulled in. So you've got to be mindful of that and where they are in the process, and respectful of their wishes, their timing, and whether that is right for them to give up or not. You can't force someone to do that. Also going through the process again and again with somebody when they're going through a kicking and then reusing and kicking and reusing and kicking and reusing, it can be very emotionally draining. So I think it's very important to define how much energy you've got to give to this person, what you are prepared to give and what you are not prepared to give, where your very, very firm boundary lines lie, and have you got the capacity to fully commit to them, or you're just going to be a supportive person in the background, or whatever it is. I think it's very important to define your energy towards someone with an addiction, and then you can more properly help them where they're at that point in their particular addiction.
Try to look for someone that you love. That's what is meant for you. Someone that, for me, supporting you at some point. Me, I don't have that support by that person, but that person's words sticks into my head. He told me once, Mika, do you really want to be with someone? And then I said, yes, but how can you be loved if you're sleeping around? Because where you into it, yeah. So there are things that you don't do normal as a normal person, but when you're at it, you can do something out of it, which is like at the end he will regret. And he was right. That's the reason why he's one of the person I'm grateful of. He woke me up on things. He woke me up on things that, because I did love him, that person.
You'll know when the time is right. You know when the time is right to make those changes. And I think in the sense of you to say, right, I'm using heroin at the moment, so some people can plan ahead, other people can't be in that position. Some people make those changes out of impulse or spontaneity because they've had a self-realisation, or they've had a moment of epiphany. So it's each to their own at the end of the day. But what I would say, in a sense, yes, I've been through the journey of going through detox, rehab, but in the end, when I finally did give up heroin, I didn't need to go to detox or rehab. Has it emotionally scarred me, my drug use? Yes, it has, because you're repressing those feelings that you don't necessarily want to face, until one day you basically have that moment and self-realisation that the path you're following is so self-destructive that you either continue with that path or you make those positive changes.
But I do think that there's a time that you've got to realise that there's other things in life, and for me the saddest thing is the amount of time that I wasted instead of pursuing things that I wanted to pursue. I wasted a lot of time, and it doesn't matter how much literature comes out on it. I can remember reading things thinking, oh, that's just terrible. That's so sad. But again, it's so cliche, but you think, but that's them and this is me. Right?
Yeah, I was going to the NHS clinics to try and give up smoking, so I thought it might be kind of like easier doing it in a group format, which it was supportive, but I don't know, it was like everybody was cheating and then not telling the advisor that they'd had a cigarette when I knew that they had, and you know, that's up to them. But I was the only one that failed. But really, I was just cheating myself. And I do think that, you know when the right time is to give it up. Nobody should make you give it up. If you want to, you give it up. And to me, the right time, obviously, is when it impacted on my health. And, yeah, I'm glad I've done it now. So good luck, whoever wants to give it up. And regarding addiction, I mean, do I ever want to smoke again? It never crosses my mind. I wouldn't even dream of picking up a packet of cigarettes or being around smoking in any way, shape or form. So I don't really believe that thing, once you're addicted, you're addicted. I think, you know, if you've got it in your mind to break it, then it's broken.
I hope in some way or another that my own life story could be of benefit to those people who are struggling. Having been there myself, I'm not here to judge anyone or you for that matter. But if you have that inner strength within inside you and you're able to talk to yourself by reflecting on such past experiences that have led you down that slippery, dark slope, always ensure that basically the changes you make come from you. If you feel peer pressurised by anyone to make these changes, but you don't yet feel ready, then be honest with that person and say, look, I want to give up drugs for myself, I want to give up alcohol for myself. I don't think I'm in that frame of mind to give it up when you tell me to give up. Always try and be honest with yourself. And in some way or another, if you find that loneliness is something that you cannot bear, because it means that you have to change your social circle of friends, there are always support groups you could attend to, or even that telephoning helplines like the Samaritans. If you need that human companionship, then that's something I would definitely advise you all to do. Thank you for listening to my story.
Possession, power, alcohol, drugs, food, sex, love, porn, internet, gambling.